How much does it cost to hike the Appalachian Trail? Well, hello, my name is Jenny, and I thru hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2024 from Georgia to Maine. I'm going to share how much I spent on the Appalachian Trail, what my biggest spending categories were, and I'm going to share some tips on how you can save money. I think it's important to mention that I didn't hike the trail with any kind of budget. I kind of treated it like a bucket list vacation hike, and I stayed in a lot of hotels and hostels along the way so that I could edit and upload videos. So my total is going to be higher than average. And for reference, I am in the middle of my career. I make all of my own money. I had saved up a good chunk of money over the years, and I had a rough idea that what I had was enough, but I wasn't very good at saving money when I was on the trail. If you look at how much it costs to hike the Appalachian Trail, most sources will average around $1,000 to $1,200 per month. But when I was looking into some of these sources, a lot of them were from articles written before the pandemic. And so we had quite a bit of inflation since then. And I do think that things cost more than they did even a few years ago. I also know a guy who budgeted for $1,000 a month, thinking that's how much it would cost. And he got halfway into the thru hike and he had run out of money. And so he ended up having to go home. Things cost more than he expected. So I would definitely budget for more than you think that it's going to cost to avoid something like that happening. So with all that being said, I spent a total of $12,252 over the course of 6 months. So that's a monthly average of $2,042. So why did I spend that much? I'm going to go into what my biggest expenses were and why I spent so much in those categories. So I broke it down into 4 categories to make things simpler: resupply, lodging, restaurants, and gear shops. So for resupply, I counted any time that I went to a store specifically to buy food for the next few days on trail. I also counted fuel and any other consumable items that I needed to replace. And my total here was $1,555. I think that this number is about right, considering the length of my trip. It translates to roughly $260 per month. Lodging was my biggest spending category. I included the costs of places I stayed, plus the costs of shuttles or Ubers to get there and back. If I paid a lump sum for lodging, laundry, food, shuttles, etc., I lumped all of that into lodging. I spent $6,752 over the course of 6 months, which is an average of $1,125 per month. This is for sure the category where I could have been a lot more frugal, but I was prioritizing different things like uploading videos. I think if I were to do this hike again, this is the category that I would focus on reducing. Restaurants was another big category. I spent $2,563, or an average of $427 per month. I did all the deli blazing I could in New Jersey and New York and Shenandoah. I couldn't resist, and I just love going out to eat. And especially when you've gone without real food or beer for several days, it's just so nice to treat yourself to a meal. I could have saved a lot more money in this category too, but I don't think that I would have wanted to. My last category is gear shops, and here I included anytime I went to a gear shop and bought gear, supplies, backpacking meals, permits, things like that. I also included shipping costs to mail home gear that I was no longer using. And when I ordered gear online, I included that as well. My total here was $1,380, or an average of $230 per month. Some of the big stuff in here were new hiking shoes. So I replaced them 3 times while I was on the trail. My DJI camera, which I bought to replace my GoPro after the screen on that died, and also memory cards. I think I did actually really well in this category, but I tend to be on the frugal side when it comes to gear, and I just use the same stuff over and over again, and I just patch and repair things until they can't be used anymore. If I break down my spending into months and I eliminate February because I was only really on trail for 3 days in February, my least spendiest months were March and August. So in March, I wasn't staying at as many expensive hotels back then. That was the month I went through the Smokies, so I wasn't staying in as many places in general. And then I was staying with my friend Tobin for a couple days. Typically when I stayed somewhere, it was at a hostel, which was usually cheaper. You could also make the case that things were a little cheaper down in the South too. Then in August, there weren't a lot of places by then to spend a lot of money, so my expenses were pretty low. My most spendy month was by far July. So July was when I was hiking through Vermont and New Hampshire and basically just living my best life. I did all the things. I stayed in a lot of hotels. At one point, I stayed in Lincoln for 3 days while I waited for Lone Star. I ate out a lot. I went all out. Looking back, I don't have any big regrets about my thru hike, but if I were to do this again, I would definitely focus more on saving money while on trail because I wasn't working. When I got home, I had a lot of trouble paying my bills. Some people think that, well, if I vlog my hike, I can get some money from that. And the only thing I would say to that is the amount that you're going to get from that isn't going to be enough to live on. It might help. Like for me, I was able to buy a new camera while I was on trail because I did that, but with the amount that you're spending, it's not enough to pay for the trip on its own. There are also costs associated with vlogging your hike, like camera equipment, memory cards, electricity, Wi-Fi, things like that, which all add up and are definitely important factors in deciding whether or not you want to do that. Your hike might end up being longer because you're taking extra time to edit and upload content. And then the longer that your hike is, the more expensive it's going to be. But I was vlogging mainly for the enjoyment of doing it and sharing my adventure with others, and not specifically for the monetary benefits. So these are things that I would do differently if I were to attempt to save money. And I think lodging is where I would try and cut the most. Rather than staying at hotels, I could have stayed at hostels, which are generally cheaper, especially if you get a bunk as opposed to a private room, or if a place lets you camp in their yard. Or instead of staying somewhere, I could plan to camp somewhere close to town. That way I could get into a town and out of a town without staying in the town. That way I could get my resupply done, but not necessarily stick around long enough to stay somewhere overnight or eat at a restaurant and just get back on the trail immediately after resupplying. If you're hiking around fresh grounds, I would also take advantage when he says that he's gonna camp somewhere and camp around him instead of going and staying somewhere, because there were a couple times where he was going to be camped at a trailhead and it was an area that I was going to camp anyway, but I chose to go into a town because I had to upload videos. But in doing so, I not only paid more money to stay somewhere, but also I missed out on meals. So sometimes because if he was camping around there, he would feed you dinner, he would feed you breakfast the next day, and then sometimes he'd give you food to go as well. In general, if you can make it longer stretches without staying in a town, you're going to save money. But for people that do end up stopping in towns, there's also ways that I saw that people would save money. Like, for instance, instead of going out to a restaurant, they might eat some of their dehydrated meals that they brought, or they might go to a grocery store, buy ingredients, and then cook a dinner, sometimes with other people. So like if everybody kind of went in on the ingredients and then cooked a dinner together, you could save a lot of money that way instead of everyone just going out to eat. Before you go and resupply, you can also check any hiker boxes to see if there's any food that you might otherwise buy, because sometimes you can find some good stuff in there. Like if somebody bought like a whole case of ramen noodles, for example, and they didn't want them all, they might have thrown the rest in the box. One thing that I wish I had the opportunity to do more was splitting rooms with people. So I did this a little bit at the beginning with Lone Star in 2020, where we split a bunk room and saved a bunch of money that way. If you're hiking around people that you feel comfortable enough with, that's always a really good option. I most of the time didn't really have like a tramily or people I was hiking with, so I was mostly solo, and so it was expensive for just me. One thing that I did before my hike, which I think was a good idea, was I waited for Black Friday sales and I bought a whole bunch of meals in bulk with the sales. So like Good to Go is really good about this, where they'll have these big sales with like 30% off. And in addition to that, you can buy their meals in bulk and save money that way as well. So I was buying like 6 packs of the meals that I liked, and I was saving a lot. Like it ended up being like maybe $5 per serving or something like that. So for backpacking meals, that's pretty cheap. I'm going to talk more about sort of how that worked out with those meals, and also talk about which ones are my favorite in a different video. But just in terms of saving money, that was a strategy I used, was I would just buy things in bulk before the hike. And whenever I could, if I was getting stuff sent to me anyway, I would have them put some of those in the box or bring them. And I did the same with my liquid IV, which is what I use for electrolytes. I just would wait for a sale and then I'd buy a whole bunch of them. And then I would just, every resupply box that I would get, I would just have a bunch of those put in that box. So I would always have plenty of them on hand. And for those, they didn't weigh as much, so I didn't mind carrying extras. I already had my gear pretty dialed down, so I knew I wasn't going to need to buy a lot of stuff on trail, and I didn't. I mostly had everything I needed at home, so I would just have that stuff. I would just swap that stuff out if I needed something. And that seemed to work out pretty well. Just kind of like having experience with your gear and knowing what works for you, so that you don't end up having to put down a big expense on like a new tent or something. So anyways, I hope that information was useful for someone trying to plan a hike. Again, I kind of lived a little bit lavishly on trail. And I don't think that I would do that again if I were to do it again, although I don't regret having done it once. It made things more comfortable, so I can't fully regret that. So thank you for watching, and happy trails.